Thank you all for coming today, and thank you all the folks at JAM and at Animation Dingle for inviting me to be here. This is my first time in Ireland, and I'm so excited to be here with you all today. My love affair with animation started in the early 60s, not with a movie in a theater, but with an album on a record player. It was a 78 RPM of Cinderella with songs and story. I carried it around our house on a small portable turntable and listened to Bibbidi Boppidi Boo, A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes, the entire soundtrack really, ad nauseum. Such is the magic of animated films. The great ones, and there's so many great ones, become so powerfully ingrained in our culture that a little girl can fall hopelessly in love with animation just by listening to the music or seeing a movie. On more than one occasion, my parents were tempted to break that scratchy record, but instead they let my love affair deepen. I am forever grateful they were so tolerant because probably enough, 30 years later, animation would become my career and my passion. I really could have never imagined myself doing that for a living. At that time and outside of Hollywood, there was very little visibility in the pursuit of a career in film. I had no idea what my next step would be. It's been an amazing run, a combination of some luck and a lot of hard work. There are a lot of aspiring filmmakers in the auditorium today, and I'm going to give you a little advice I hope will help you all with your journey. I can't cover it all, but I'm hoping to leave a little time at the end for your questions. I'm sure most of you are understandably looking ahead with a sense of uncertainty. In fact, I read that between the ages of 20 and 30 is the most uncertain decade of your life. Anxiety-provoking maybe, but there are so many exciting possibilities. Your generation is very familiar with change. Since you were born, the ways we shop, communicate, travel, become informed, and get entertainment have been transformed by companies like Amazon, Apple, Uber, Facebook, and Netflix. I suppose that when in a few years Elon Musk makes it possible for you to spend a weekend getaway on Mars, you'll be able to take it in your stride. But these are the kind of macro changes that affect the lives of millions. What about the smaller changes that are about to impact and shape your life and career? I stand before you as something of an expert on this subject. So I want to share with you 4 lessons that I've learned from coping with all types of change that I hope will facilitate your journey. First of all, be flexible. In fact, if you only remember one thing I say today, this is the one to hold on to. My first job out of college was as a publicist on a live-action film production called King of America. This took me to my first movie set. I walked into the production office, and any thoughts about what I might do went out the window. I knew this was where I wanted to be. Another of my earliest production jobs was driving a big van on a location scout near Atlanta, Georgia, where I grew up in the United States. Not exactly what I had in mind when I got my college degree. I'd be chauffeuring some important filmmakers from Hollywood who were looking at locations for a film called The Mosquito Coast. Not an easy assignment, driving a bunch of guys around the North Georgia mountains for a week. But my passengers included the film's producers and director Peter Weir and an actor named Harrison Ford. When I met them at the airport, the first thing one of them asked me was, "Are you sure you're old enough to drive?" I needed a boost just to get into the driver's seat. I recognized, though, that this was a unique opportunity, and I was flexible. So I did a good job, and by the time I dropped them off, they had offered me a job as the movie's production coordinator. They must have liked my driving. On a different occasion, I took another job I had no training for, a bodyguard, for none other than the bodyguard himself, Kevin Costner. My assignment was to accompany him to the location in Mexico for a film we were working on together called Revenge. Little did I know I'd have to fend off every fan between LA and Mexico City. But I delivered him without a hitch, and when the time came for him to put together a crew to work on his next film, his directorial debut, Dances with Wolves, he hired me to be the associate producer. This is why I urge you, as you start climbing your career ladder, to be flexible and take advantage of every opportunity. Who knew that the bodyguard job would lead to my first producing credit? Which brings me to my second tip. As you grab those ladder rungs, there's a way to make the climb a little easier. Seek out a mentor. Think of your mentor as someone higher up the ladder who can help lift you up. But there's something even better than a mentor, and that's a sponsor. Mentors may open doors, but sponsors actually walk you through them. They may start out as your boss or your supervisor. You work hard for them. You do your best. You make them look good, and they recognize that. They will make calls on your behalf. They will help you get interviews. They will go that extra mile so that you don't have to walk alone. Sometimes it takes someone else to see in us what we may not see in ourselves. They have faith in us, and once you have that faith, anything is possible. I was lucky enough to have two sponsors. The first was producer David Picker. He told me unequivocally that if I wanted to be a producer, I had to leave the safety of my home in Atlanta and move to Hollywood. Later, there was Jeffrey Katzenberg, first at Disney and then at DreamWorks. He kept pushing me to do more, which culminated in my stint as president of feature animation at DreamWorks. I'm so grateful to have had both David and Jeffrey. They taught me so much, and I have benefited over and over from their guidance. The third lesson for dealing with the challenges of change is be brave. The next seminal moment in my career brought me to the day when Peter Schneider, the head of Disney Animation, offered me a job on an animated movie called Simba. For those of you who know Disney trivia, Simba was the working title of a film called The Lion King. I thought about it, but turned it down. I wasn't sure if I was being brave or foolish, but I told him my dream was to be the producer, and I was determined to hold out for that opportunity. 6 months after I said no to Simba, Peter Schneider called me back to say that he wanted to introduce me to a director of a small film Disney was making with a new studio called Pixar. Yes, the film was Toy Story, the world's first computer animated feature. I had held on to my goal of being the producer, and now I had the chance. There's no way around it. It often takes courage to deal with change. After all, change takes place on many fronts. You might be doing something for the first time, and that means there's a chance you'll not succeed. For Toy Story, I knew that I'd be doing a lot of things for the first time, and this job was challenging from day one. It started the day I walked into my office. There was no typewriter. I panicked. How could I get any work done? The first thing I was going to have to learn about a movie made with computers was how to use one. Pixar had never made a feature film, and I was a filmmaker who had never used a computer. What a match. And that was just the beginning. Don't get me started on the intercom story. But the point is, the folks at Pixar were going to have to change their culture from more of a business to a production environment. I was the catalyst for that change. Sometimes change happens to us, but other times you have to take the lead. Computer-generated animation was incredibly primitive. We had both technological and financial constraints. Remember, this was a time when the very biggest hard drives were all of 1 gigabyte. It took hours just to render a few frames of a scene, and it was very expensive. Another problem to solve was the editing, a process that had been tried and true for 100 years. You know, 35 millimeter film and the moviola. We were creating digital images, and digital editing made sense. But did everything have to be reinvented? The equipment they wanted to use was a machine called the Avid. It had never been used on a feature film before, and very few editors knew how to use it. I guess change was inevitable in filmmaking, and it seemed it was all happening on this movie. We had creative challenges, too. There was a big issue with the early recordings of Tom Hanks and Tim Allen. Believe it or not, Tom and Tim sounded a lot alike. In our story reels, which contained a lot of pencil drawings, as you all know, you couldn't tell who was speaking. What's more, Woody wasn't sympathetic. The audience needed to sympathize with his insecurity about being replaced by Buzz, whose personality wasn't distinct either. It took a huge amount of trial and error to discover Buzz's character as a comically overconfident space ranger who was in denial about being a toy. But slowly, When we found our way to show these character traits through writing and performance, but Buzz and Woody stopped sounding alike. So for this moment, I just want to share with you my favorite moment in the first Toy Story film. It's funny when my dear assistant Sam was helping me put this together, and I picked that clip, and he watched the end of it. He goes, "Oh, I get it now. You're Woody." And he said, "Buzz are all those idiots that you deal with on a daily basis." And I said, "Exactly." Throughout all of this, there were many instances of great anxiety and uncertainty. There were days when I thought it wasn't going to work, but we were all excited by the challenge of breaking new ground. I worked with a courageous team of dynamic, creative, devoted people. We tackled the challenges one at a time. The result was, by any measure, a landmark motion picture. There was no way it could have happened with all of us having to bravely confront many moments of real fear. This is a reminder that the things that we're most afraid of almost never happen. I was afraid Toy Story might never make it to the screen, but it turned out just the opposite. As I've learned over the years, when dealing with fear, you really have only two options: give in or persevere, which really means you only have one option: persevere, which is actually the fourth lesson. The quicker you realize this, the better. I've been there. It's been 4 decades since I sat where you're sitting. I've climbed quite a few rungs of the ladder that's in front of you. And you know what? Change still isn't easy. But through all of the challenges, I've learned to persevere. For example, I'm very proud of the films I've been working on for the last 10 years, How to Train Your Dragon 1, 2, and 3. But each of them have had creative challenges as tough as Toy Story. The first Dragon film started off as a straight adaptation of a popular children's book, which was the story of two runts: Hiccup, who was the runt of his village, and Toothless, who was the runt of the dragons. After many months of work, we realized this story wasn't the movie we wanted to make. This led us to the right story, that Hiccup would be the first Viking to befriend his dragon enemy, and that Toothless would be the most fearsome dragon of all. It seems obvious now, but it took us a long time to figure out the best narrative hook for the film. I wanted to show you really quick here a scene of Dean DeBlois and Chris Sanders, who directed the first How to Train Your Dragon, talking a little bit about some of our story issues. Dean DeBlois, who I think came to Dingle a couple of years ago, actually had a little handheld camera that he used throughout the 3 films. So a lot of these clips were cut from things that he was just filming as we were making the movie. And I look back on it now and I realize how much of all this stuff actually made it into the movie. It's pretty remarkable. I have another clip from this same series of stuff about the making of the first film, How to Train Your Dragon, which really leads up to a moment that we have used throughout all 3 films that I thought you would enjoy seeing. It involves Chris Sanders, Alessandro Carloni, who was our head of story, and Tron May, who was one of our story artists who became the head of story on the 3rd film, about creating this iconic moment in the movies. No spoilers on How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, but we definitely have a major callback to that moment in the 3rd film. So I hope you all will enjoy that. Anyway, now I'm doing it all over again. I'm developing a new film for DreamWorks called The Wizards of Once by Cressida Cowell, the same book author as the How to Train Your Dragon films. And as always, there have been some challenges. 2 years ago, the studio was acquired by Comcast, which brought a lot of change and some uncertainty too. We went from being small and independent to being part of a large corporation, which means new faces, new ways of doing things, but oh so many possibilities. In fact, every time I deal with the challenges of change and uncertainty, I find it a little less difficult. It never gets easy, but I assure you it also never gets boring. I love that I have a job where I don't have to do the same thing every day. There are always the sudden surprises and revelations. And once again, I remind myself of lesson 1, be flexible. As for lesson 2, find a mentor. These days I find I'm the one being a mentor and a sponsor, something I find very gratifying. And every day I am mindful of lessons 3 and 4 as I go out there and try to be fearless and persevere. I encourage you to do the same. And to quote J. Paul Getty, without the element of uncertainty, even the greatest triumph would be dull, routine, and eminently unsatisfying. So thank you again for having me here today. I'd like to end by showing you a piece of custom animation we did for How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World. It features Kit Harington. A lot of you know him from Game of Thrones. He was the voice of Eret in films the second and third Dragon, and Toothless. And the reason I picked this is because I really love it. It actually almost became our third trailer. It went viral, and so many people saw it. But it just shows you the evolution of what you can do with these characters when you have animators that have worked on the movie, the same animators worked on the movie for 10 years, and they really can make Toothless seem so real and believable. And then we'll have a little bit of time for some questions. Okay, I think we have some time for some questions, and we actually have microphones. So does anybody have any questions? Oh, come on. Here we go.
You got it?
Yeah. Hello. You talked about the Comcast acquisition and like that it brought a lot of fears to the studio. What is when a big corporate acquisition like that happens? What's your biggest fear? Like, what are you afraid is going to change? Will there be like?
Oh, everything. Literally everything.
New people in the studio? Or
completely.
Just
literally all the creative people just walked out the door.
Really? So,
left me alone. Seriously, I mean, the new studio may or may not like the movies that you're making, or not like, but they may not fit in what they want to do, and all of a sudden, a lot of the other studios started to poach our talent. Right. Say, if you don't know what's going on over there, we have this, this, and this, and it was just one thing after another, and then there was definitely a consolidation of the overlap. I'm sure, Fox and Disney are probably getting ready, poised to go through all this as well. But it was really, and it happened very fast, and it was, a bit unnerving. And I think probably the number one thing was that we had this culture there of people that had worked there. I mean, I've worked there, I had worked at DreamWorks 17 years, and I was the baby of the group in terms of that. So many people had started with DreamWorks at the beginning, so you had people that had been there 20 and 25 years, and just a huge amount of just not knowing what might be. I think, and even now it's still figuring itself out. But the good news was they were very committed to How to Train Your Dragon, which was, actually we were just getting ready to start sort of animation. And we got a new release date and whatever, and they absolutely got behind it. But it was just like all the unknowing of those things, of people that had worked together like that, and especially the Dragon films. A lot of us had worked together. A lot of the key creative talent had worked together since the first film. That we, some of us, I had actually been on it. There are a couple people that had been on it even before me, 13 years plus. So it was a hard time. Who else?
Hi, Bonnie. As I may have told you, my two daughters are huge How to Train a Dragon fans. Mm-hmm. Toothless was the big Christmas present in our house, and the premiere of the latest movie in the States was a big event for us. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, were you surprised at how many young girls, connected with the movie? Because on the surface, you'd kind of think it's a boys' flick, but mm-hmm. We have another friend, and she just draws dragons all day. That's all she basically does with her life. So, did you talk about during the process how it would appeal to girls as well as boys, and what do you think has connected with?
I think it actually, for me, I really believe it starts with good underlying material. And this, the book author I mentioned, Cressida Cowell, she's a really great creator of characters and worlds. And I think even though, if you're all familiar with the books, they're the storyline in the book is very different from the movie storyline. But I think if anything, we tried to remain true to who the characters are. And I think, and the biggest change we probably made in them, again, a little bit of a different storyline. But as I said when I was talking, Toothless was the runt dragon. If you watch or know the movies, there's this little green dragon that runs around. It's like one of the extra dragons, and it hangs out with the soothsayer Gothi. They're little green. That was Toothless. That was the dragon of Toothless. And so that was really, really a big change that we made. We made him created this most fearsome dragon, but we kept the personality traits of the dragon that Cressida had created in her books. So I thought that was key to it. But I think, to answer your question, I think that's what appeals to, boys and, men and women, boys and girls. I was telling our crew when I was in LA, I went to introduce a screening of the third film for BAFTA, and that for a BAFTA screening, and I literally, it was like 10 o'clock in the morning, there was a line of people, obviously BAFTA members with their families, and there were so many teenage girls in the line holding their toothless Build-A-Bears. I was shocked. I especially a lot of kids like that, but definitely a lot of older, teen girls and early 20s girls, but they all had their toothless Build-A-Bears. So there was something in the character of Toothless that was, hugely appealing. And if not to do any spoilers, but Toothless gets a girlfriend in movie 3. But a lot of that was, thought way ahead from our fans. That for years I've been saying Toothless needs a girlfriend and she should be all white. And I mean, we were thinking a lot of the same storylines, but I think a lot of what we do was supported by the fans. So it's always, honestly, it's always been, kind of equal. Although I will take credit for it, in the original book and Hiccup's group of friends, they were all boys. And I said, absolutely not. So Astrid did not even exist in the book, and so we created Astrid. I gave her her name, and she's been a character that's became really popular in terms of the How to Train Your Dragon films. But I also want to say one last thing is that when the movie first came out, there were a lot of girls who wrote fan letters to us saying that they actually aspired to be Hiccup. So I think it has to do with their personality and the qualities of the characters that we created, that they were aspirational for both boys and, the boy characters were aspirational for some girls and some boys, and, I just think it's really comes down to these, creating good characters, which I think is the heart of good storytelling. Who else? Yes? Or is there anybody here? Yep.
As a producer, what's your take on writing for an audience versus writing for yourself?
So I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Do you create it for to the audience?
So I say, as a producer, what's your take on storytelling, like writing a story for yourself versus writing a story for an audience? Sorry about that.
Well, I think there's always this thing about screenwriting is write what you know. So I think most people who are writers probably start with trying to write for themselves. And I've been around the animation business long enough to tell you that most of the animation people that I've been around are usually the best fans anyway. So I think you have to start making something that you feel good about, because if you try to start second guessing what the audience, it's good to have that knowledge. I'll start by saying that it's good to understand who your audience is and who you might be writing for, but I think at the core of it, you have to make the people that are making the movie have to feel good about it themselves and feel happy with their accomplishments, because the only way that you know that you've done a good job is that if you enjoy it and you watch, your peers and your family enjoy it. If you depend on the fickle audience, you'll be completely disappointed every time, because it's hard to know. You can make, there are lots of beautiful films that never get seen by anyone. So I think you really have to start by making, creating stories that you feel good about. You, the creators. Is that okay? Yeah. There was somebody over here.
Hello. Thanks so much for the great talk. So the question I have is kind of related to turning down Simba, but then working on Toy Story, and where normally in a product, or the material that is brought forward to you in the project that is presented to you, what would normally be the point where this is good and this is definitely something I want to take, especially with How to Train Your Dragon, where the first draft seemed to be so different from the final result.
Well, for me, I feel like some of the projects find me and sometimes I find them. So it just, every movie's a little bit different. Toy Story, they found me. I was actually the Disney producer on the film. Disney was going to finance the movie, and they wanted somebody sort of embedded with them who they would accept. It had to be a mutually agreed upon situation. And but I find that I can grow to love somebody else's idea. I find a little place that, oh, I understand that, especially that piece, and I identify with that and find a way to sort of make that my own. And that's what gives me the satisfaction. With How to Train Your Dragon, I had produced. It was at DreamWorks. I had produced Over the Hedge, and I remember specifically we probably had maybe 4 to 6 months left to finish Over the Hedge, and I was at the studio on Saturday, and I was walking around, and I had to go up to the executive floor to find something, and my boss, Jeffrey Katzenberg, was there, and he started chatting with me in the kitchen or something. He goes, well, what are you going to do after Over the Hedge? And I said, well, I've seen in the development group, we've just optioned this book called How to Train Your Dragon, and I love that book, and I can see what the movie, I have an idea, I know what it's going to, it can really make a great movie. Don't know what it is yet, it was really a little picture book, but I think you just have to sometimes have the wherewithal to stick it out and say, this is something that's going to be good, and I think the role of the producer is to sort of really fight for that on a day-to-day basis, because we definitely went through, as I said when I was talking, we went through a lot of trial and error before we actually found, honestly, the correct writers, the correct directors, and who had the vision of we felt like, okay, this is a movie that we feel like is good for our audience. So again, I think that's the role of the producer, to sort of be the person on the front line who's fighting for that, even though we don't know exactly what it is yet, I promise you it's going to be good, and be able to convince people on a day-to-day basis that it's worth investing in. And as we know in feature animation, we're talking about a hefty investment of time and money. Is that right? Are we out? Okay. All righty. We're up, but I'm around, so love to talk to you all. Thank you for having me.